Hi there, and welcome to another episode of 411 Pop Culture. I'm your host, Justin Steele, and with me today is the very lovely and talented Nicole Della Rosa coming live from Toledo, Ohio. How you doing, Nicole?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm really excited to talk about one of my favorite genres of animation, not just kids' films in general, because I do think that they appeal to a sort of demographic of like the tween. It's not purely adult anime, and it's not just children's anime. It's got that interesting in between for like almost teenagers. But Studio Ghibli, there have been many, many nights I remember you and I finding at Walmart a new Studio Ghibli DVD came out, and we're like, we have to watch this immediately.
Yes, I love
But
it.
yeah, so what is, in general, what do you think of when you think of Studio Ghibli? Like the animation, do you think the story, everything?
I think I just love everything about them. I don't know what it is. I just think that it's the story more than anything. The animation's amazing all on its own because it does have that like anime feel, but it's also not as I don't know, like rigid as some of the anime I feel like can be. So
Sure.
I really appreciate that it brings that little Disney feel to it. But the moral of their
Yeah.
stories are always so amazing, and I feel like it's something I would always, if I ever have children, I would love for them to have as a staple. Because I just think, the further we go with Disney movies, they kind of lose that like seriousness and that charm and that moral, like that strong moral. Because there's always such a like predominant moral of the story if you watch
Oh, yeah.
any of the Studio Ghibli something. I just think it's amazing.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. Two things. My cousin, he definitely showed these to his daughters, my goddaughters, and I love that he got to have that experience with them. But you're right, and it's a different sort of moral fiber than just being a good person, or I think my instant think Disney Snow White or something, where you're either the evil queen or you're the pure girl. It's not about that. It's about nature. It's about taking responsibility for who you are as a human, but also your responsibility as a human in nature, and I love that. I love that it's something like a message that if a younger person, I came to these later, but a younger person watching these, it would be more naturally ingrained in their fiber to consider that sort of thing. And yeah, I just love it. I love the animation, the stories. I feel like, it's like watching almost a dream on screen. You get to see this sort of dream come alive, and it's just beautiful, beautiful.
I think part of it too is like I have always loved when how they portray women in their stories. It's just they're not some little princess who's like, oh, come save me. They're
Yeah,
badass bitches. They're coming, taking names, and getting
absolutely.
what they want. They're working for it, and everything unfolds. And there's just an equality to it that I feel like Disney princesses don't necessarily get. It's always the damsel
Absolutely.
in distress, and I just think it's so amazing that they can show that these women they don't get me wrong, there are men that help. It was just like more of an equality thing for me that I
Oh,
appreciate.
1,000% agree. And even with like the villains of the story, whether it be female or male, the villains often are well rounded. Like I was rewatching Princess Mononoke, and the oh, I should have written down all these names to have a reference to, but there's the woman who is at the ironworks, and she's sort of the villain of the story, but her purpose is genuine. She wants to help other women. She wants to help these former prostitutes find a place that they can be proud of. She wants to make sure they're secure and taken care of. She's doing messed up stuff to the environment and hurting it, and could ultimately hurt these women, but her intentions are good. And so you do get these well-rounded female characters, that aren't just princesses. It's again going back to the Snow White. It's not, the evil queen who's all vain and that's her only thing, and Snow White who's just like hanging out with birds and the dwarves and all that. These are people with real problems.
I just want to say I feel like it's very relatable to like real world things. Like they don't do where they have like this make believe story. Like you said, they're former prostitutes. She's trying to give them away. She gets very myopic about how her way. She doesn't realize outside of her box that she actually is doing more damage than she is good. But I like how ultimately, like they end up showing the error in the way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And they show both sides of the argument. It just kind of reminds you to like step outside your box, look at everything. Everything you do has an effect on something, whether you're doing good or not. You may be doing more harm than you are good. So
Well, and even with that character, something horrifying happens to her in the end, and it could be like a spark for revenge, and instead she's kind of like, okay, well, wait a minute. I'm doing something wrong in my life here. And it's nice to see that even the bad guy can come away having learned a lesson, and it's not just they're sent off to Siberia or punishment or something. But as we go on with this, so the way we set this up, I asked Nichole, what are your top five Studio Ghiblis? And then I was going to say what my top five Studio Ghiblis were going to be. And for those out there, yes, it is officially Studio Ghibli, even though it is inspired by the Italian word Ghibli, which is something that I used to call it at first was Studio Ghibli. And then after we heard it, I think I definitely was like, oh, Ghibli, okay, which isn't a real word. So it kind of works that it's this fantasy. But as we were doing this, I looked at Nichole's list, and I'm gonna do my list and then hers because I feel like she does. If this is a top 10 list, so to speak, her top five are definitely essential ones you should see. And I was torn looking through my list by like, oh, do I want this one or this one? I gotta choose five, this one or this one. So I looked at Nichole's list and I was like, well, everyone she chose is like between A and B, the A of mine. So I'll choose all the B ones. And together we're going to compile a sort of top 10 list of our favorite essential Studio Ghibli movies. And again, like I would maybe switch one or two of hers around with mine, but overall, I think we'll go through the list like this. So my top five are Castle in the Sky, Nausicaa, Secret World of Arrietty, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Tales from Earthsea. But again, I'd actually put Tales from Earthsea at the very end of the list, but that's my general list. And Nichole, what is your list?
So my top five is going to be Ponyo, Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, and Grave of the Fireflies. In no particular
Excellent.
order, just any five of those.
Mine too. Yeah, I realized I had said Tales C as like my number one spot, Tales from Earthsea, and I'm like, well, no, that's definitely not my number one.
Right.
But yeah, I think that of all the movies, and it's difficult. I really, really have a deep, profound love for each and every single one of them. But Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away, if there's two that I'm going to show anybody right off the bat, like, hey, if you want to be introduced to this world, those are the first two I saw, Spirited Away, and then I followed up with Howl's Moving Castle, and I was hook, line, and sinker. Now, my cousin and I, we had grown up watching animes and stuff like that, but I had put the Studio Ghiblis to the side because I'm like, well, I don't want to watch these sort of children-y Disney ones. I prefer the adult animes. And what I was missing out on. I had no idea what I was missing out on. In the world of Spirited Away, Chiro, also known as Sen in Spirited Away, is a magnificent young teenage girl, just preteen. This girl who's not she's not snobby or anything, but she's definitely not happy about her situation and wants her parents to know it. And then over the film, she develops though always as this genuine child, this child going from childhood to adultness. And the animation and everything about Spirited Away, I love Spirited Away. What do you think about it?
I really just loved her character, and I loved the way she handled herself because she did go into it as a child, but she came out of it a woman. And like,
Yeah.
even though it was like her coming into and having to grow up and leave that immaturity behind. And then, in the beginning when she's having that, like that, if, arms crossed, like little, fit that she's having with her parents before, at the end, I think the real, like, it comes to light that like you're going to have moments in your life that you're going to be like not happy, but at the end of the day you want to live life to its fullest and just accept things as they are and
Yeah,
go with it and know that it could be so much worse, and as it does get
absolutely.
worse for her, and then she finds true love, she finds herself, she finds her inner person. So I just think it's amazing how you watch her unfold, and then it's just like nothing ever happened, but it was like one of those, I fell asleep and I woke up and I had an epiphany. It was just
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It does have this dreamlike quality about it. I love the idea of going into the spirit world. There's all these fantastic spirits, like No Face, who again is one of those characters that he's mysterious, then he kind of becomes the villain, then all of a sudden he's sort of childlike, and he just needs to be taken care of, being accepted for who he is. He thinks he's got to give money, give food, all this stuff to be loved, and he doesn't. Chiro ends up accepting him as he is. And moving on to Howl's Moving Castle, that one also really got me. I loved the the fantasy element of this castle that's like ever changing. It's so clever. You know, they turn a little knob and they're in this part of town, turn this knob, but it really does become, I guess the original novels were a little different, but this was right after, you know, around 2004. So 9/11 happened, the Iraq War. And I think it was Hayao Miyazaki, who we should just stop to say for a minute is a brilliant director and animator and storyteller. But Hayao Miyazaki really was anti-war, and which obviously shows in his work. He's pro-nature, anti-death and destruction. And Howl's Moving Castle really does have that sort of element. But again, the character we're meant to follow an older woman for most of the story, you know, an elderly woman. And how often do you see that in animation that that's the main character? You know, it's this elderly woman. Yeah, she's a younger woman put under a spell, but like the story herself, she becomes this charming, hilarious person, finds herself. You've got this super egotistical Prince Charming, almost like it's almost like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. That's who we're following with Howl. And you know, but he is actually the prince and has all this good stuff. But what do you think about Howl's Moving Castle?
I just really love her tenacity in the movie. Like she's just, you cannot break this woman's spirit. She's been turned into this. She's like, well, I'm gonna deal with it, and then she just keeps this happy, positive attitude. And she's like, no matter what is thrown at her in this movie, she turns it around and she makes it okay. And
Yeah.
you know, it's a beautiful thing to like see someone in well, an animation film to like really just take a positive aspect, like, oh, not woe is me, I've been turned into something, like, you know,
Yeah.
I feel like in all these like other movies you find like they're turned into something and they're waiting again on Prince Charming to come save them, where she is the savior of Prince Charming. You know, she comes and brings him back to the land of positivity and have a good
Yeah.
outlook on life, and she saves the day. Ultimately, it's not him.
And you're right. She reacts to everything. Like everything just gets thrown at her and she does the best that she can with it. She makes mistakes. She learns from her mistakes. You know, it's most of the characters too, not just Sophie. All of them kind of have to find within themselves what's worthwhile, what makes them a better person. And again, the animation is fantastic. You're taken into this whole other world that seems like a real place. You know, it's got this sort of almost Victorian feel to it, the women with their costumes and dresses, but you also believe that it's a whole nother world.
I really appreciate that. Like in the beginning, it shows like her mother is like your typical damsel in distress, you know, and it shows that just because that's how your family is or the women around you are, you don't have to fit the form. You can
Yes.
step outside and be your own person and find yourself. I just think it's great.
Yeah, they almost wanted to like shame her for like not being so frivolous or not getting upset overly dramatic about things because she is a very sensible person and believes in being like doing things that make sense, you know, and are just practical. That's the word I'm looking for. She's a very practical person, and they just don't get that. And I think that's hilarious and thought provoking at the same time. Moving on, I do want to talk about Tales from Earthsea, which is directed by Hayao Miyazaki's son, and it wasn't as well received. I do want to say, for my own part in watching it, you and I feel like our list is mainly composed of the more fantasy Studio Ghiblis. I think the other ones are beautiful too, but they're more like serious stories. They don't really enter the fantasy world. And we had watched a few of those, and so when I came to Tales from Earthsea, I'm like, okay, good, a fantasy one again. I missed that. So already it had a little bit of a lead for me, and if I was gonna like it. But I do think that of that story, what's the best part of it for me is the villain Cobb, I think his name is. That villain in that one, you watched that one, right? We watched.
That's just the necklace, right?
Correct, yeah, and this creepy, I mean, that villain in it, if nothing else from that movie, I thought the villain was one of the better villains of the entire series. He's one of the few that don't really learn a lesson in the end. I feel like he's motivated by like semi-pure reasons, but he is definitely a dark character. He's creepy in it. I remember him creeping me out, so I'm like, well, I definitely could get him to make it the list for that reason. And Ponyo, I think, is definitely. I think, like, when I think of Studio Ghibli, I think of Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away. But I do say that when I think of you and Studio Ghibli, I think Ponyo is what comes to mind first. And I know that you really have a love for Ponyo. I remember I seem to remember you saying how cute Ponyo was and how much you loved that story.
I absolutely love it. So I had watched Spirited Away a long time ago, but I had no idea about Studio Ghibli. I had no idea about any of these movies. I just remember like, wow, that's a really amazing movie. And then Ponyo came to theaters, and I actually took my little niece to go see it, and I
Oh,
freaking loved it. I loved it so much. And that's actually Ponyo is the one who made me like delve deeper into Studio Ghibli. And then I talked to you about, it, and you were like, oh, well, I have all these other ones for you to watch. And then that's how I got on the
okay. Is that how it? Okay, okay.
so for me, Ponyo, just the story, she's of course, this magical creature, and she decides it's kind of like a little mermaid, but different. She turns,
Yeah,
she starts from this sea creature, turns into this. She she found her love, and that's what she wanted, and that's who treated her the way she wanted. And there's a part of it where they're saying, oh, humans are disgusting, and but it's true though. If you really think about the amount of trash and stuff that you're doing to our oceans and how much it
yeah.
affects our earth and like in nature. And I think my nature lover in me was just like, this is such a good movie. It's teaching children, like, don't destroy it, because just because one little piece of trash to you, but if everybody threw a little piece of trash in, you're destroying your planet, and you're destroying the beauty of it, and it's killing creatures we don't even know exist, to me. So
Yeah, that magic. And even if they're not like, okay, real life magic, in their own way, they're magical creatures at the bottom of the ocean we have no idea about. For me, Ponyo is it's the best justification for why Studio Ghibli belongs to Disney, or it belongs has the same qualities of Disney, but at the same time illustrates exactly what is different about it. It is sort of the Little Mermaid tale, but a completely different version of that. It's not about princesses and princes and finding love per se, other than like a friendship love. But it's this little boy in his relationship with his mother, and they're trying to reach out to his father, and he feels that loss by just having love for this creature that turns into his best friend in the end. Again, it's a film that also shows the importance about the elderly, about taking care of those that grow old. Not just abandoning them. The mother, she works for a retirement home, and she is willing to risk a hurricane, like this huge flood, her own death, just to make sure that they are okay. Oh, and then my favorite part of Ponyo, though, is once the boy and Ponyo decide to finally journey on his little boat.
yeah,
And but it's magical when you're watching Ponyo. Like, that for me is when the movie really begins. And yeah, Ponyo is a solid one.
I just agree. I think it's so amazing, and it is more of like, I would say, kid friendly than the
Yeah,
others. I would say
yeah,
that's the beauty of it, because I think it draws kids in, and even though there's like a normal storyline that's going on that would seem more mainstream, the underlying story is still there, and the moral is, about love and taking care of your earth and where you live and your surroundings and your people and how everything's connected, and it's just amazing, I think so.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And I guess then that'd be a good time then to talk about Princess Mononoke, because where you just said Ponyo is more kid friendly, Princess Mononoke is definitely, it's still, I think a child could watch it, but it's definitely got some more darker adult themes. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I'm watching it. And it starts off pretty traditional. This wild beast is attacking the village. But then when the boy himself, the hero of the story, is becoming cursed, and he goes through and he just all of a sudden like chops some guy's arm off, the head, and it's so quick and brutal and bloody, but
Yeah.
yet you're just in shock. You're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. But that story could not be told. It emphasizes the rage inside, which is one of the main themes of Princess Mononoke, is how we can be consumed with rage, and how we can, even though we have the best of intentions, they can be taken out and ruined, and ruin the forest, ruin humanity, each other. But that's a great blending story of, I think Princess Mononoke encapsulates Hayao Miyazaki's deepest beliefs, that in Nausicaa, where it's about this, what we do to each other as humans, our interactions with animals, beasts, creatures, but also our the earth we live on and how we are damaging it. And it's got all these great themes to tell this sort of epic story that is beautiful, brutal, harsh, sad. Yeah, I love Princess Mononoke. Is one of the I came to it just a smidge later than the other ones, and I fell in love with it. But I guess most people do know that one first. But are you a fan of Princess Mononoke?
I really love Princess Mononoke. I think that the storyline is amazing. I think that it makes you confront things that we try to hide, like when they shoot the beast in the forest, like the god of the forest or whatever. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about that, but you know when that
I think
happens.
that's right. Yeah.
So when that happens, though, but it makes you confront the reality of the situation. Like this is the reality. Like people go out of their way to to destroy, you know, but it doesn't mean it has to be the end. So
Correct.
there's still hope. There's still time to turn things around. And even in that, he doesn't seem angry. You know what I mean? He's not
Yeah.
mad
Well
at you
said.
for forgiveness there. And I just think that it's important for you to walk away from that knowing that, you know, it's just this beautiful story and it's just people are going to be horrible. There are going to be horrible people, but there is still hope to turn everything around. So I think that's ultimately.
Very well said. In fact, I think that's spot on for what the ultimate message is. There's all these themes throughout the story, but you're right. The ultimate message is that we've done damage, but we can still fix it. And it doesn't have to be, this spirit god has his head cut off, but he's not angry. He's forgiving and gentle. He's, because of what they did to him, he is inadvertently creating damage, but it's not like vengeful damage. It's inevitable, and he is forgiving and can still have hope for the future. And then also Kiki's delivery service is also a fun one. Again, another one that's more kid friendly. I really thought Kirsten Dunst did an amazing job with the voiceover work. It's an interesting story because I like that it's the main character. She's sort of in this drab dress the whole time, and it shows that you can have a compelling, attractive character that's not in a beautiful dress or flowing through. She takes what she is very seriously, and she takes it sometimes too seriously, and she has to learn to find that perfect balance within herself because she does start to lose then her magical qualities, trying to grow up too fast. I think one of the main messages of Kiki is that growing up too fast is just as problematic as not reaching maturity soon enough. And I love that message to kind of kids to be like, hey, stay a child though for as long as you can. Don't stay too long, but stay as long as you can.
I completely agree with your description. I love the Kiki's delivery service. I think that for me, the moral wasn't as prominent. I think it's crazy how they show this like young girl going off on her own. Like, what is she like? A teenager, right?
Yeah,
And then
13.
yeah, it was like a baby, and she's out there. She's making a living. She's going to work every day. She's work, trying to save, and she's got this tiny little apartment above a garage.
Yeah, yeah,
I had to be like 21 before I got one of those. So like it's kind of
yeah.
crazy.
Right.
13-year-olds out here killing it. So and I think her and her cat and I love her and her cat's relationship. And I think it's adorable how when he meets someone else and she guys starts to grow up, she loses that. She loses the
Yeah.
ability to him. So I think that was immediately like, wow, I really need to slow down. I need to go back. And I think it's great.
Well, I could jump in right there. I guess I didn't realize this, but in the original VHS copy, that clamshell, I guess the ending is different on that than what we have now as a DVD ending. The original ending sort of implied that she was going to be able to talk to the cat again. Gigi is the cat's name, but the DVD gives back Hayao Miyazaki's original intention that no, she can't. And it's not sad that she can't talk to him anymore. It's her embracing her adulthood at the same time. Or I would rather say maturity than adulthood, because again, the message is sort of don't grow up too fast, but you do want to mature when it's time. And that's sort of what Gigi's relationship is, because I do love the relationship though with her and Gigi. I think he's hilarious.
It makes me sad they don't talk.
Yeah, I think, but that's, and maybe, and that's also going to be us as Americans versus a Japanese culture where we are conditioned watching a semi-Disney movie to be like, no, they've got to be friends again in the end. But to be truth though, I still talk to my cat, and I know that you talk to your dog, and I believe that they could talk back. I think they just choose not to. Also, Secret World of Arrietty's one that came out a little bit later, and I just was blown away by the animation in that. I am this weirdo, though, that always was obsessed with little people and the concept of like being shrunk, like I was of the age of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So like I love that concept. So I was a big fan of The Borrowers. I didn't read the books. I think I maybe read the first or second book. I remember there was a show called The Littles that I really loved, but I always loved that concept. So when Secret World of Arrietty came out, I was on board. I'm like, yes, this is great. And I really did love every minute of it. I don't think it has, if I were to say, Ponyo, Spirited Away, Hayao or Howl's Moving Castle were all E pluses, I would say Secret World of Arrietty is an A minus. It's still great. It's still perfect and wonderful. It's just there's maybe one just a little bit missing, but overall, that is one of my favorites. To her as a character, like Kiki, she is concerned with being, proper. With Kiki in her relationship with the boy that she kind of meets, she is old. He calls her old fashioned because she says they should be introduced and stuff. And Arrietty, it's for a different reason. She shouldn't be discovered. But even once she does, she sort of treats him like she would a boy caller in terms of, well, then you need to be proper with me. You need to treat me as a lady, a young woman. And I really, really love that about the character of Arrietty and the Amy Poehler and her husband at the time, Will Arnett, I believe his name is, do the voices of the couple. And they both really do a good job too. That's a good one. That's a really good one in my book.
I agree. I thought it was really great. The only reason it didn't make my top five is probably because to me it was missing that little extra something.
And it is. I do agree it is.
But I'm definitely a fan of like super strong woman stories. Not that she's not, because as you can see while we're talking, they're all pretty much pretty strong women.
Right.
In timelines of all of these films. So I mean, it's really amazing. I disagree. I think it's a really great movie, and I think it's cute. I think it's just, for me, it's just that in your face morals of the story, just slapping you around, like, look at me, this is the point. Like, and I think that's just for me what I love about the ones I picked.
Yeah, the other ones it happens more naturally, which is what gives them the A plus. And like I said, it is great, terrific. It's just I would give it an A minus compared to an A plus of the rest of them. We should definitely talk about Grave of the Fireflies. That one is going to be different. We have been being repetitive with some of our themes that we love. Grave of the Fireflies, I did not know going in what a beautiful but dark, dark, sad story that Grave of the Fireflies is. It's based on the bombings of Japan, but it punched me. I'm gonna let you kind of talk about Grave of the Fireflies because it was on your list, but I love it. It's great, but people should know going in, you're gonna cry.
Oh, and I heard that before I watched it, and I was like, I'm not gonna cry. Yeah, right. I bawled like a baby. I cried for sure. It's such a beautiful film. Like, if you could take a war story, and for me, like, war stories are really hard because they're so bloody and it's so real. It's hard for me to take it. Like, it's hard for me to focus and sit down and watch it because it's just so hard to watch.
Yeah.
But you throw this at me, and like, this is like a real depiction of probably how it was. Like, and like, the whole theme of the Fireflies is, in the end of the day, like, they end up on their own and they can't eat, they're the only thing they have are the fireflies. And it's just, the fireflies are there to entertain them. It's the only thing that'll keep their mind off of hunger because, they're starving.
Yeah.
They're abandoned, like pretty much abandoned. They're just alone. They're just orphaned children who are out trying their best to just feed each other and just take care of each other. But it just shows how ugly those times were for them and how it really had an effect on, and I think he makes such a good point by, Miyazaki, I mean, by showcasing this film during the Second World War. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because he's just showing you what his people went through, and this is the ugly side that nobody wants to see. Everybody wants to see this bright side. Oh, well, this is the war. It was great. It's all this money's going to all this propaganda and all this stuff. But realistically, who's really suffering? Those who didn't have a choice. It's the children, the innocent people. It's the wives that got left behind, and the fathers are off dying, and then the children are left to try to live on their own.
It's also unfair. It's one unfair thing after another. I think it's their aunt is pretty cruel to them, and she's dealing with her own stuff, her own stresses. But it's just these brother and sister, they have the fireflies and only each other. And in the end, it's not enough. And that's so sad. And he sort of transcends the story at the end. but I almost always forget the very, very end. It's sort of like bookends the beginning and the end, or like bookends to each other. But I'm so sad at the end of that one that I forget the ending. It's definitely a powerful, powerful movie that gets forgotten, I think, in the lexicon of not just animation that's beautiful, but it's an interesting movie, a visual story of something so utterly heartbreaking and based on something that's completely senseless overall.
And I think for me, though, one of the best things about it is it's one of the first movies. I think we're getting better in film these days about being realistic about outcomes. But I feel like that was one of the first movies, and definitely I would say one of the only animation films I've ever seen that were very realistic about what happens. Like, no, they weren't graphic about it, but you know, at the end of the
For sure.
day, end of the film, you're just you don't get some sugar coated, oh, everything's fine, we're all great, we're all going to be perfect. No, it doesn't end like that. It's horribly sad, and it makes you really deal with like those kind of emotions. And I think that you could really have kids watch it to understand and try to cope with loss, and that could be like a buffer to even try and get them to comprehend what death and loss can really feel like, because it's just so, I don't know,
It's
powerful.
bleak. It's very bleak, but very powerful. And, it would negate the message. It would invalidate the message of the whole film if they lived happily ever after. He's making a point that, like, this is what war does. This is it. This is the end result. I'm glad that you had it on your list. I was surprised when you sent me your top five list. I was like, oh, I didn't know that it had affected you the way it did, that it would make your top five. Like, I was surprised and impressed, and I'm glad that we got to discuss it. I also want to talk about what I think, if I were going to do this as a top 10 list, it would definitely be in my number three spot is Castle in the Sky. That for me is one that doesn't have the animation of Spirited Away, Arrietty, Ponyo even, but it is a beautiful, fun, adventure. It appeals to the fantasy in us all that, like, when we look up at the clouds and we say, what if there's a castle up there? And there is, and it's a great story of, again, this strong female character, but she befriends this sort of kid that's practical. He's full of sense, but he also has a sense of wonder that he inherited from his father. And that he ends up having vindication for his father in the end. But again, it's another one of those movies where we have a set of characters that seem like the villains, but then they end up becoming lovable. The sort of thieves, the mom and her like six kids and her husband, but they're like so crazy and out there and fun. But they're also like in the end, they actually are decent people. It takes a minute to get to that point, but then you're like, oh, they're great. But just it's a mythical story. It's definitely, I might argue that next to Ponyo, it's definitely one of the more Disney-ish of all of them, but it still has a sense of maturity that's lacking in a lot of these like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin type stories. There's something great about it, but I definitely would say that, when I was doing the list, if I were going to switch them around a little, Castle in the Sky is definitely at the front. In fact, that's hard for me to, it's hard for me to even number it that low. I feel like putting it at number three is too low. It's just for me anyway. I mean, it's definitely one of my all-time favorites.
I'm really surprised it is three, just because I remember when I came to you and said, oh, like Studio Ghibli, you're like, oh my God, Studio Ghibli. I love them as well. Look at this. And Castle in the Sky, I believe, is honestly one of the first ones you ever had me watch with you.
Okay.
And it was great. It was great. I'd be lying if I said I remember all of it at this point. It's been so long. And I just bought like the whole series and just sit down and watch a
Oh,
movie.
did you really?
Yeah, I
I know I
did.
have them all individually, but I'm jealous. Like I would like to have the whole series.
I got it for on the low. I think I got it on eBay. It was super cheap. You buy it all in one. It comes in one case, and they're all
Oh,
in.
I think I know the collection you're talking about, and I'm
Yeah,
super jealous of you right now.
yeah. Well, there's so many I haven't watched still. I did watch that cat one, by the way. I don't know if we
Oh,
can.
the Cat Returns.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of those at the end. The ones that didn't make our list that are just fine and fine. They're the B ones, the B pluses. These are all I think are A. These all range from A plus to A minus. Our list, and we have a couple Bs. I wouldn't give anyone a C. But no, yeah, for me that one, it's the one I go back to the most. Castle in the Sky. Like when I'm sitting there, I have my collection out and everything. But I'm always like, am I going to choose this one? And it's almost always Castle in the Sky that I end up pulling out because it hits all the beats that I want. Definitely Princess Mononoke has a certain theme, or Spirited Away has a certain idea, but Castle in the Sky for me, I know it's going to hit all my marks. It's going to check off everything that I want in a Studio Ghibli film, and I love it. And then last on my list, first on the whole spectrum of Studio Ghibli, it's the film that's created Studio Ghibli, because it's technically they weren't Studio Ghibli at this point, but it's this movie. It's now considered part of it. Gave them the financing and the go ahead to keep going, and that's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. It's a great, wonderful story. Definitely has all of his themes about nature. I love the character played by Uma Thurman, who's sort of like this villain, but again, you get to see other sides of her vulnerability. She realizes she made a mistake. The character of Nausicaa, I think Ali Loman is her name, but her voice is very soothing throughout the film. Again, the animation might be a little bit more crude than the rest of them, but it's still beautiful and amazing and a powerful story, and definitely makes my list as Nausicaa.
I think the only thing that makes me withdraw from it is that rigidness. That it has more to me of a true anime feel to it, and
Sure.
I think that like kind of I don't know what it is about those films that literally make me want to instantly go to sleep. It is what it is.
For sure. I get it though. I do get it.
But it's a great movie, and like you said though, one of my reasons why I really do enjoy that movie though is because Studio Ghibli just has a tendency to show, yeah, there's a villain, but it shows that the villain isn't encompassed by this pure evil. There's sides, they're multidimensional, and it makes you see things aren't always what they seem. They might seem like they're very black and white, but they're very multicolored, and the way they portray themselves, but they actually do feel emotion, and they're not just these sociopaths that are out there, you know.
Totally. Oh, yeah, very much agree. I do want to mention then some of the sort of honorable mentions, I guess, or just real briefly some of the others, like The Cat Returns. I think just keeping on the theme of what you were just saying, for me, I feel like it's probably the last one I watched actually. I just forever put it off because they kept releasing like The Wind Rises when Marnie was there, which has a ghost story to it, but overall it's these straight laced From Up on Poppy Hill, which are fine, but those ones kind of put me to sleep. They're just like they're building a plane or something like that. Like I get it, it's beautiful and it looks great, but I want the adventure. I want the sense of like, no, we're in another world sort of adaptation. So The Cat Returns I kept putting off because I'm like, well, this one's going to be a fantasy one, so I'm definitely going to want to save it. It's like my last candy, whatever, my last piece of candy or whatever. And I did enjoy it, but I did feel it was more run of the mill. I would give it a B plus even, but it definitely doesn't achieve the same emotions and inspiration that Ponyo, Howl's Moving Castle, etc. It's lacking in that. For me, it was. But what did you end up thinking about The Cat Returns? I already kind of know.
I completely agree. I mean, like you had mentioned that like when a wind rises or the wind rises or however it's worded.
Yeah.
Like movies, I mean, coming from watching Ponyo and Castle in the Sky and Spirited Away, I'm just expecting like this movie to just like invoke me and like fire my soul up, and just like give me that like yes. And I hate to say it, but I was so underwhelmed that it didn't, for whatever reason, and I don't know if it was just the scripts. I don't know. It doesn't take me past. It's like those movies that you watch, like it's a good movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's not a great movie, and it's not going to stick with me, and it's not one that I'm going to reach for. Like you had said, you always don't know which one to go for. And it's kind of funny because you would think, mine would be like Ponyo or Spirited Away, but actually Howl's Moving Castle for me is the one I always end up grabbing when I can't decide to watch. It covers all the bases. It's feel good. It's got its sad. It's got its happy. It's got its romance. It's got it all. And ultimately, it's just at the end of it, you walk away like, I can do anything.
Yes. Howl's Moving Castle's that for me. After Castle in the Sky, it's always Howl's Moving Castle. Always, 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 always. Yes, and I agree. And yeah, I kind of blur together like The Wind Rises and From Up on Poppy Hill. I really couldn't tell you they're separate plots. For me, they're almost the same. And you're not going to confuse Ponyo with Arrietty. You're not going to confuse Mononoke with Kiki. It's not going to happen. And it's like they're perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with them critically, but they don't have that joy for me. I mean, maybe because I don't love airplanes the way, like Hayao Miyazaki was very obsessed with airplanes growing up, and the artistry and animation of that. And so I think that's what that was. But it bums me too, because I did a little research that he chose to make those movies instead of other movies that were more fantasy. I'm forgetting which ones, but I know one was mentioned about the story of this caterpillar, and it would all take place like it's a journey of this caterpillar that wants to go from one tree to another tree. But I would have, and along the way he meets creatures
Fascinating.
and stuff. Yeah, I think that would have been really interesting. That would have been more akin to what we're used to instead of, these kids are starting an airplane clubhouse. Ugh.
For me, I feel like to me the comparison is the original, like the Lion King 1.5.
Yes.
You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like for
Yes.
me, it's like I love the Lion King more than anything.
For
Lion King
sure.
1.5, like I'm gonna watch it just because it's like the Lion King.
Fair.
I'm not
Right.
gonna go for it again. Like it's
Yeah.
just boring. It's not even boring. It's just it lacks like conviction, like the
Yeah.
storyline all in itself. And like you said, watching a caterpillar go from one limb to another, it might seem. I could see where it might have been a hard sell, but I think that's what his fans love about his films, though, is it's outside the box, and you don't think of the struggle it took for that caterpillar to get from here to there, and it's just an amazing, like in its own journey.
Yeah,
It's
that's the
just
creativeness. That's the inspiration we want. Something we don't necessarily think of that all of a sudden becomes this epic story because it would be an epic journey from him for the caterpillar to go to A to B. Exactly. As a
that's
as an artist, he should be able to creatively do whatever he wants, but it should be then something not Studio Ghibli. It shouldn't be with that moniker. A 6-year-old, yeah, I want to. What I love about Studio Ghibli is that it appeals to me in my 30s to the 6-year-old inside of me, to the 8-year-old. And me in my 30s watching The Wind Rises, it's something that doesn't appeal to the childhood in me, and it could be this magical airplane or something. He doesn't even do that. Oh, well, thank you, Nichole, so much for doing this with me. I've been wanting to do an episode with you for so long, and especially with something that I think we have a lot of reasons that we're friends, but if we have something that's a visceral, something we could touch thing between us, it's these Studio Ghibli movies that I think our friendship always makes sense, and it's one of those things that makes it make even more sense, that we love this together. I'm so glad to do this with you because Studio Ghibli is something that people know about and it's out there, but I think it still needs to always be kind of pushed forward, like, hey, you need to watch these movies. You need this in your life, you know?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for saying Studio Ghibli because I have always called it Studio Ghibli. Somebody corrected me the other day and said it's clearly Ghibli, and I was like,
"You're right. You're right."
Well, I call it Ghibli, or
Yeah.
not. Yeah, I was like, I call it Studio Ghibli, and I will always call it Studio Ghibli. So if you don't like it, that's cool. But I was like, this is my thing.
Oh, I love it. And thanks for joining us, everybody, for another episode of 411 Pop Culture. This is Nichole Della Rosa, and I am your host, Justin Steele. Don't forget, you can find me on Wicked Horror or on Twitter at Wicked Horror Justin. And if you like what you see, please comment, like, and please subscribe. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good one. Where's your belly? Where's your little belly? There it is.